today. Well, more and more tools are being developed to fight the spread of the coronavirus, and governments around the world have begun using digital tools to track the movement of people who are infected, identify those who may have been exposed to the virus, and measure the extent to which citizens are complying with stay-at-home orders. And an example of these instruments are the newly developed mobile apps that can track you via GPS or Bluetooth. We've heard of examples from South Korea, Singapore, but also closer to here, Israel, then also Poland and the UK, where the NHS is launching a smartphone app which will, trace close contacts of people carrying the virus and alert users who have been in contact with them to advise them to self-isolate. So it's not just location and mobility data, it's also health, epidemiology data, and some of these apps are voluntary and others are mandatory. They're apps created by third parties and some are open sourced. And just recently here in Europe, the European Data Protection, the EDPS, the European Data Protection Supervisor, called for a pan-European COVID-19 mobile app. And so the public has been turning its attention to those apps that collect, handle, store our personal data. And while these tools can prove useful, and clearly digital technology is playing a major role both in fighting the pandemic and in facilitating deconfinement strategies, there are already a lot of questions being asked all over Europe about the implications on our digital privacy and the intrusive nature of some of those solutions. So questions today: to what extent are these tools effective? Should European countries, traditionally very protective of privacy, follow the leads of other countries? Who is and who should be in control of this digital resource? How do we hold each party accountable? Can tools be developed that minimize privacy risks? And under what conditions, if any, should the government be allowed access to such tools? With us today to discuss, I'm very happy to have Karen Melchior, member of the European Parliament for the Renew Europe group, and Diego Naranjo, head of policy at European Digital Rights, which some of you already know as EDRI. Each of you will have a few minutes to provide an opening statement, after which I will ask you follow-up questions and we'll turn to the audience's questions to allow for as much interaction as possible. Now, the first word goes to you, Karen. What are some of the thoughts that you wanted to share about this topic today?
Well, I think it's actually putting the situation that we're in at the moment is sort of putting the finger on all of the sore spots on data use and government use of citizens' data. Because a lot of possibilities have been held open when we looked at the GDPR for governments to use personal data for health and security reasons that companies are not allowed to. So this is sort of the crunch time for trying to uphold our liberal values and see how we can find liberal solutions that protect people's privacy at the same time as solving the health issues that we stand before. I think it's really important to maintain a balance where we do not say we don't want to use technology at all, because I think there is a great use of technology in solving this situation of trying to track people. I would rather have a good technical solution than have policemen coming home to people and checking if they're maintaining the quarantine. But it's really necessary that we build the right tools and that we use data in the right way. You mentioned that the NHS is looking at building an app. So is the Norwegian government, and so is the Danish government. The Danish government announced this the day before yesterday, and they're still looking at how to do this. I'm quite happy that you said that the European Data Protection Authority is recommending doing a European-wide app, because that was actually what I was thinking, that we need European solutions to this crisis, because this is not something that we can maintain in nationally. And also, I'm a little bit worried that we do not have the emphasis on data protection and good use of data in the member states as much as we would have if we looked at it from a European level, because we need to use the highest common denominator when we're looking at the use of data and not the lowest, because we want to have solutions that we would trust in the hands of our worst enemies of democracy, because we must expect that the technologies and the systems that we set in place there will be people that will be tempted to misuse them. And also there will be leaks of data. It is not a question of protecting data well enough, but it's a question of making sure that there is minimal damage when a leak happens. So solutions where we pool all of the data, personal data of citizens in a central place, I think that's quite dangerous. But trying to look at decentralized solutions where the information about who we've been in touch with is not actually information about that person, but is a way of being able to contact that person if needed be. I think that's the way to go. And then also we need to have very high standards of openness about the source code and that the solutions that we're using, so that we can track what's going on and know that nothing's going on behind closed doors that we can't see. Aileen, I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Great. I'll stay unmuted then. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, you mentioned this idea of balance. Some countries have chosen to use technology the most efficient way possible, so meaning at the most granular level. So Chinese has been quite extreme on this effective use at the expense of privacy. Do you expect European governments will choose to balance effectiveness with privacy, pursue a more privacy first approach? And I just wanted you maybe to share your thoughts on, European researchers have developed a pan-European privacy preserving proximity tracing. It's called PEP.
With a very easy name of PEPP
dash PT. Yeah, it's a mouthful. So, but the idea of this app is that it wouldn't infringe on the EU's high privacy standards. So another question I wanted to ask you next to, can we balance effectiveness with privacy and pursue a privacy first approach? Can we, also do contact tracing in a way that is really in full GDPR conformity? And sorry for this follow-up question, but you mentioned that this European approach is important. Do you believe it is possible to have this European approach?
I believe it is possible, and from what I've been looking at this this standard, it looks quite promising. It's a standard, and it's something that can be integrated in other apps, so that you don't have like one central app or program that it's being used for, but it's a standard for how to collect the data. And what I like about it is that it's using Bluetooth data, which is more precise, and it also shows who you've been in closer contact with, rather than GPS or telecommunication data with which masts you've connected to, which is very imprecise to hundreds of meters and therefore doesn't serve the purpose. What I also like about it is that you decentralize the collection of data so that your phone knows which tokens of other phones that it's been in touch with. So you collect that, and if at some point you need to be able to communicate to the people that you've been in close proximity with, then you do not know who they are, but you will have to then communicate with a central bank that can translate the tokens and communicate with them. And I really feel that it's important that we find a European solution or cooperation on this, because for me, the greatest challenge so far has been that each member state has been doing their own thing. And we've been under the illusion that the health nationally is something that we can control, but the health system nationally is actually dependent on how good the health system in the countries and the regions around us are. Italy has a great health system, but was still overwhelmed with the number of patients that they had. So we can't just think, oh, we have a great health system in Denmark or in Germany, and therefore we don't need to care about what's happening around us. We really need to wake up to the need for European cooperation in health matters.
Yeah. Thank you. And yeah, you mentioned, Bluetooth as a precise indicator. I think it's a 10 meters range, and wireless data from Wi-Fi is 40 meters range. I've done a little quick research on that. It's quite interesting to differentiate those different types of location data. Now over to you, Diego from Edry. Would you like to share some of your thoughts on today's topic?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. I liked a lot the meme that Daniel was sharing before, and that brings me to the quote I wanted to mention from Yuval Noah Harari, the famous historian. He put it very clearly recently in the Financial Times when he said that the temporary measures had this nasty habit of outlasting emergencies, especially as there is always, of course, a new emergency that's coming up in the horizon. And he also said that when people trust public authorities to tell them facts about how to take care of themselves, citizens can do the right thing, even without having a sort of big brother watching over their shoulders. So that's basically what we believe as well. In general, of course, we are in a serious public health crisis, and all across the globe. And data collection can be valuable, but however, this response needs to be fundamental rights-based, with always necessity and proportionality in mind. We're saying that there is a need to, in effect, use some technology to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. We believe that the data needs to be protected now and also for the future. The tools need to be open, so done with the free software or open source. The data needs to be limited and not used for any other crisis in the future, and generally defend freedom of expression and information. We saw what Hungary is doing now, clamping down on those who do what Orban believes is spreading fake news around the coronavirus. We have some examples of good and bad ideas. Some of them you were mentioning before. The worst I've seen so far, there could be other worse ones, but I've seen the one from Israel, which is allows the domestic intelligence services, not the health services, not even the law enforcement, but intelligence services, to track citizens by geolocating them. And of course, we can assume they build a database of where and when they were. Then a bad one is the Polish app that involves people uploading selfies of themselves when they are prompted to do so by officials. So the law enforcement agent can pinpoint their exact location. And it's mandatory, by the way, to those who are infected or in quarantine. Other governments have asked people to do similar things, but only voluntarily. One good example is the Spanish one, the latest one, which instead is basically a way to, instead of collapsing the call centers, you just go and enter your symptoms. And if you wish, you can use your location just to let you know to which health center, which region you need to go, because we have a decentralized health system. And also in Kerala, in India, just to go a bit abroad from our borders. And there's an app that provides counseling services for people who are in quarantine, and gives them information about community kitchens, for example, for migrant workers, information about home delivery of groceries and food, among other things. And of course, the app that you were mentioning before, that the EDPS was also mentioned, so this is a way that using Bluetooth signals within mobile phones instead of using GPS. I think that could be the way to go. It is, of course, with the highest privacy and data protection standards, and it's in open source and free software. Our member Chaos Computer Club also did a list of requirements. I can mention that afterwards. But well, I just wanted to finish with the World Health Organization, which still gives us the same ideas. We need to wash our hands, we need to keep social distance. And I have not heard from them that we need to do mass surveillance of all citizens among their ideas to prevent the spread of coronavirus.
Yeah, thank you very much, Diego. Yeah, I think it's good to bear in mind that it's a combination of measures that really can make the difference in this situation. Not just one can do it all. And I think we're seeing I think it's in Singapore, they actually went back to confinement in spite of having used,
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, hello?
Okay, so basically COVID-19
I think we're having an intervention, but I probably should ignore it. If it's a question, you can type it in the section questions and answers for participants, and we'll definitely take a look at your question. Thank you. So just moving forward from your intervention, Diego, and thank you very much again for that.
Sorry to interrupt you, ma'am. Sorry to interrupt, but like,
My pussy hurts.
I'm sorry, don't listen. Due to COVID-19 and like the social distancing,
I cannot hear you very well, sorry. So you mentioned some of the safeguards that should be put in place really to make sure that there is no misuse of data and that this data shouldn't be used for other purposes. You mentioned time limitation, but we see in Poland, I think I've read that it's 6 years, which is quite a long time still, you know, for governments to hold that data. Is it justified? The DPA of the Data Protection Authority, of the Netherlands said that anonymizing data is impossible. These are his words from last week. So if anonymized aggregated data is supposed to be the safeguard, is it enough? Aren't there some additional controls that should be put in place?
Well, I believe that what the Dutch authorities said is that geolocation data cannot be anonymized. So, and with that, we agree, because even though it's aggregated, then they can do use other technical tools in order to know where these people are. But I don't think they said it's impossible to use anonymized in general. Then on the time issue, in our position, then it should be up to the health authorities to say, okay, now the crisis is over, and then every data which has been gathered and collected and used and processed for those purposes needs to be then deleted if it's not needed after the crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. I have another question about those models that could work for Europe, that could be adopted by European countries. Should we go for a self-reporting model at European level, relying on voluntary consent? And if so, how do we make sure enough people opt in and accept this so that these are efficient? Or should we rely on voluntary consent, or should we be mandating people to give their data and put our privacy aside for herd protection?
Well, I would say that we need to ask the health professionals what they need, not what we think that we need them to do. So once they say what they need, then we'll see what kind of app we need. Generally, what seems so far that we need to know if we have been around someone that could have been infected, and therefore if we have any symptoms, we can go to our health services and so on. But it doesn't seem like we need anything more intrusive than that. And generally, we believe that there needs to be based on a voluntary app. This doesn't need to be mandatory. It has to have epidemiological sense of purposes. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be private by and by PAL, and no central entity collecting all the data, as Karen also mentioned.
Thank you. Perhaps, Karen, you have a reaction on that, but I also have another question on top of it, if I may. It's about the responsibility. So who should we trust with managing this data? Should it be private companies, third parties, governments, the Commission, the World Health Organization, as the EDPS mentioned it? Should it be also the responsibility of governments to tell me that my data is being collected, or should it be those companies that I enter contract with, that they should be telling me that they're complying with the governments asking for my data?
I think we should start from a voluntary starting point, and I think it's really important to say that, in Europe, our societies are open and protective of our citizens' rights, but we are also based on a very high level of trust, and we need to, as legislators and as governments, to make sure that we can convince our citizens that it is a good idea to take part in collecting the data, that there is a use for them to be part of it. If we do not have a good solution, if we cannot provide the arguments for why we need the data, then we cannot win the trust of our citizens. And if we are trying to force people to provide data, then they will try and circumvent the collection of data and therefore the data will be less valuable. So I think it's really important that we find a trustworthy solution that we can convince our citizens to take part in. And I think we need to give the data to our health authorities, and we need to have a European cooperation between the health authorities. But I would like to avoid having a central place where all geolocation data is being collected, because as was mentioned both by Diego and as you mentioned, the Dutch Data Protection Authority, geolocation data is practically impossible to keep anonymous. So therefore we should not try and do the impossible, but avoid centrally collecting this data that we know we cannot keep anonymous, and then only collect the data that is truly anonymous and that is strictly necessary.
Thank you. Diego, do you believe it should be a responsibility that is shared or mostly governmental responsibility?
Shared by whom? Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
It should be shared by governments and companies when it comes to explaining how the data is being harvested and
Well, first of all, I believe that in this case, as in many others, it should be the public authorities that develop the app. There's an app that we need, first of all. And in that case, it should be the governments telling us why they need the data and what kind of data, for how long and what purposes. And in order to be sure that that's what they want, we need to see how the code is written. So we need to liberate the code and make it in free software. And then regarding to whom the data should go, I think the health authorities should receive the data only if they need it. And of course, this cannot be used for discriminating people or sending data to, let's say, law enforcement authorities, not to mention intelligence services, as in the case of the Israeli app.
Yeah, well, I do have a couple more questions, and I just to remind our participants that they can ask their questions in the Q&A section. Don't hesitate. One question I have is really about, so we are talking about this because we sort of read about all this, right? This is part of our jobs, part of the things we do, including in Brussels here. But do you think there is awareness among people about these practices and these topics? And if not, is there a chance for or an opportunity, or should it be the role for privacy advocates and experts to play a role in this? Diego, you mentioned healthcare practitioners and specialists should be more involved. What are your thoughts on how to raise awareness further?
Generally, related to privacy, we always say that it shouldn't be that the users need to be half-away hackers in order to use technology. In this case, the solution is the same. People should trust the authorities, should trust the people who develop apps, and that can only be done if it's done in a transparent way and with privacy by design and by default. So it should be up to the authorities that develop the apps, or to the health authorities who are taking care of us and the health workers, and to tell us what they need and how to improve collectively better.
Karen, what would be your response to this? How to raise
people actually want to be able to do something and to help both protect the society that they live in and also themselves against the virus. And I see a lot of people sharing data about themselves voluntary in quite unsafe ways. In Denmark, a Facebook page or Facebook group has been created where people have been sharing health data about themselves voluntarily. And I do not trust companies that are put in the world to do completely other things than health, to have the measures in place to protect this data. So I think it's quite important that we give people tools that they can use to feel like they're taking part in fighting this virus, and that they are adapted to the societies that they're in. I think one of the good things about having a sort of open standard for sharing data in a safe way is that it can be used in different applications that are adapted to the situation nationally. Diego mentioned that there is an app in Spain that is then providing information to the local healthcare center, and where you can get advice and put in information and get the information that you need to get the help that you need, and similar in Kerala in India. And so this open standard can be built into national or regional apps that are adapted to the services that local authorities are providing to their citizens.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you very much for taking that concrete example. Unless, Diego, you wanted to react to Karen's comments, I want to ask you maybe, overall, do you reckon this potential of using location data is useful? If so, what type and when should we use them? At what phases are they truly efficient? And should these tools become part of the regular toolbox? And the reason why I'm asking is, if these measures become part of, emergency measures, we know how these have a way to, sort of creep in our constitutions or the common law, and how do we roll back on that is a problem potentially.
Yeah, well, Dr. Michael Ryan from the World Health Organization said very clearly that we need to protect both health and individual freedoms, including data protection. And I think that is the case, that we cannot just use this as an excuse for using geolocation now, and of course not in the future. Generally, geolocation doesn't seem to be necessary. It doesn't seem to be even legal to use in the first place. And in case someone proves that it's necessary and proportionate, then we can decide if use it or not. Because we were talking about efficiency or effectiveness and balancing that with privacy, but let's look at the charter again, and I think that privacy is a fundamental right. Effectiveness or efficiency is not. Even if it was something that it was efficient or there was some efficacy behind the giving up, we need to see again if the limitations of fundamental rights are up to the legal standard, again, necessary and proportionate.
Thank you. Karen, did you want to come in on that?
I think it's a false sort of setup if you say you need to either have personal fundamental rights or you need to have effectiveness. I think truly effective solutions are protecting fundamental rights. And we see in repressive countries where the instinct has been to suppress information also about a health crisis when it's been developing, rather than sharing it with the correct authorities, because there is not the level of trust needed. So if we start not respecting and protecting fundamental rights, we will have a less effective solution.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering, you mentioned fundamental rights, and I think you mentioned the importance of solution at EU level, and that openness is key, etc. How do you see this could interact with the privacy law, the GDPR? What could be the impact on our European privacy laws?
Yeah, if I may start, in fact, that's something that we use quite often, is that and data protection law or privacy laws are not there to prevent the use of data. In fact, it's the opposite. And GDPR and e-privacy directive, by the way, we're still waiting for the e-privacy regulation. They are there in order to allow the use and processing of personal data, but with some safeguards and legal constraints in order to use it properly. So I don't think they are going to be preventing anything. They are the opposite. We can actually lead now worldwide by say, look, with data protection standards, we can do a lot of good things, including helping to prevent the spread of the coronavirus.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think there's right now some kind of bisbee with the way the Commission was trying to help in coming in with some sort of guidelines to share with member states when it comes to deconfinement, using potentially this type of apps. But it seems there's some resistance from member states to really let that European coordinated approach actually take place. Perhaps Karen, you wanted to react on this.
Could you repeat the question again?
Well, the question was more the impact on our European privacy laws in general, but also
No, I agree.
what's
Yes.
going on with the Commission's, this week suggested an approach, but I understand that they've had to sort of back off a bit.
The recovery approach that they were then told that they couldn't announce because they hadn't debated it with the member states yet.
Yeah, and I think that included guidelines for how to use.
I think I completely agree with Diego that the privacy laws that we have allow us ways to use data in a safe way. We need to have solutions that we would allow untrustworthy illiberal governments to have access to, because you need to build a system not just for this government that you might trust and like, but also for the next one which you may not trust.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your answers, very concise, so this was quite efficient. And now we have enough time to turn to some of the questions that our participants kindly asked on the platform. So I have one that is about, overall, the use of an application seems sensitive, I'm reading, but vulnerable groups like Generation 65 plus, or the elderly, these people have, they probably have less, they make less use of smartphones. And I know that I think there's 5 billion people have mobile phones. That doesn't mean they have smartphones. So how can we protect those people better? That's the question. There might not be enough Bluetooth bands around also to distribute to all in need. It's also important to add here. So what are your ideas on this to respond to our participant? Philip.
I think that the Generation 60 plus would probably often have family that can help them. I am more concerned about people sleeping rough, undocumented migrants, others that are sort of living on the edges of society. And these vulnerable groups, we need to be able to help in other ways. And I think that this underlines that an app is not replacing the health system. We need to have other solutions as well, but it is a tool amongst others to try and see, okay, if we want to track who a person who's been contained, who's contagious, has been in touch with, that this is a tool that can help us both for this crisis and the next.
Diego, any reactions?
Not really. Yeah, same. You see, if we need an app or some technology, we use it. Otherwise, let's try to see. I have one of my pin tabs on my browser, the World Health Organization website, and what I check every day, and that's where we should trust for the time being, not the technologies or even human rights organizations like us. I think we should listen to the health authorities so far.
Okay, thanks. There is, a lot of, I think, inequalities being exposed with the situation, and one, clearly the digital divide. And just a side note, it's definitely showing there should be some more efforts made to make sure everyone is on the same, more or less as the same level as possible. Another question by Michaela is about one of you, I think it was probably both of you, mentioned that trust between individuals and governments are key to develop efficient solutions. However, we see examples time and time again in both the EU and beyond that, governments set aside citizens' rights. Is there a way to build such a system that would withstand also governments that are less trustworthy?
Yes, I think that is the challenge. We need to build a system that we would trust an untrustworthy government with, because we never know what's going to come next, and if you collect the data, then somebody will be tempted to use it. And
Diego, any?
Yeah, likewise. We have said similar arguments in other issues that we work on, such as the terrorist content online regulation. We say you need to build the rules in order for the worst students in the room, not for the best ones. We cannot think, okay, country X, which is the best human rights friendly here, and does it very well, and they don't infringe fundamental rights. But we need to think about the worst ones that are coming up, all the far-right governments that are just waiting to grab the power and to crash on legal dissent. So that's why we need the best standard, the best fundamental rights-based approaches to this crisis.
Thank you. A question from Giorgio Vernoni from the Centro Einaudi Torino. Excuse my Italian, is terrible. One of the solutions that have been lacking in emergency management is the use of sample surveys to learn about the spread, characteristics, and location of the infection. The use of such sample techniques, he writes, and the voluntary provision of information could be an effective solution for a good balance between the protection of privacy and the effectiveness of digital detection. What are your thoughts on Giorgio's comment?
I'm not quite sure what he means about sample techniques. Is this testing, or is it analyzing which kind of responses are more effective? I don't know if Giorgio can reply to that.
Yeah, maybe Giorgio, if you wouldn't mind specifying a little bit more your question, that would be helpful. But I think he means, yeah, sample techniques as in more limited techniques, perhaps, and really the opt-in. We talked about this earlier, whether voluntary provision of information could be effective. So I think a lot of the questions here tend to be more or less similar, but I still want to make sure that I share them with you. So actually two people are asking about the Philippines. I don't know if you're familiar with that example as to, how do you see Philippine law enforcers monitoring and even summoning social media chats against those who criticize the government in terms of the government's response to the virus? But I'm not sure that's a question you can address. So yeah, and another question is about how to use the data, how the data might be used against the people, and how to ensure the data privacy and protection for individuals sharing the information. But I think we've discussed a little bit more around those lines. Now, I wanted to ask your thoughts on what do you think we are learning from all this that might outlive the COVID-19 crisis, both saying, okay, this is what we think will remain, this is what we don't want to, types of measures, or, these are the measures we don't want to stay, and these are the measures that we think we should, keep and build on after this.
Well, I think a lot of organizations and companies have been sort of thrust into a digital world where they have to use the internet and teleworking and teleconferences, that we have realized how non-digital most of our organizations actually are. And the European Parliament is one as well. And I think we see the need to actually use the best tools that are available in our societies and our companies. And I hope that this will provide for better digital preparedness of our companies and organizations, because we never know when the crisis is there and we need it. I hope that we will not be seeing a number of so-called temporary measures that will be put in place that are infringing on fundamental rights, because I'm afraid that the temporary will not be temporary, but will outlast the crisis.
Thank you. Diego?
Yeah, from my side, similar. I think one of the things that we're seeing, even within EDRI, we still are trying to organize our GA, or General Assembly, at the end of this month, which was supposed to happen in Belgrade. And we cannot find a proper free software alternative. We're trying a few of them, and none of them seem to be working properly. So it seems clear to me, at least, that there's a need to invest in free software alternatives for teleworking and the conferencing and so on, and have a strong, resilient infrastructure to make that work, because sometimes we all connect at the same time and then it all collapses. And generally, strengthening the public sector. I think that's one of the outcomes that I think are confirmed after this crisis. We need more money for the public health sector. We need more money for the postal services. We need more money to build the real resilient structures that are the cornerstones of our societies.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, your responses made me think of something else. You mentioned more money is important, but there are some people arguing that okay, money is important. How do we get enough money? And maybe that's a bit a side topic to this discussion we're having. But still, I think a lot of the things that we want to implement in the future, if you look at the EU data strategy, the AI white paper, these are ambitious policies that will require investment. And given the current context, where do we, how do we pull those resources? Where do we find the money?
Mm-hmm.
And another side of the question is, we have laws that protect, data and privacy in Europe. Are these laws flexible enough to be able to use data?
Mm-hmm.
Are the exceptions in the GDPR enough, or should we clarify those? And also, do we have enough data? Is it easy enough to share it? These are questions on my mind that I just want to offer you again before we end the discussion.
Yeah, on the issue of the money quickly, perhaps Karen also wants to jump in. For me, the solution I see is very simple: it's the tax in the rich. I was reading Owen Jones recently during the quarantine, and I was surprised to see that before the tax on the highest level of society, it was up to 60 or 65%, and now it's around 45. So I think we need to go back and take more from those who have more. And I was reading also recently how every time Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, inhales or exhales, it earns enough money to buy 1 or 2 ventilators. That is machines that help people to breathe. So it seems clear that there's money out there. We need to find it. And also when we had to find money to bail out the banks, it was we also very quickly found it. So I'm sure it's out there. We just need to grab it. And about the flexibility of the data protection and privacy laws, I already sort of talked about it before, but basically I think there's quite a flexibility. There are exceptions, there are guidelines, the EDPS is out there and available in order to provide guidelines. Also the European Data Protection Board and the national authorities as well. So I'm sure there's the need to use personal data. If the GDPR doesn't give enough guidance, there are enough experts out there that will provide it.
Thank you. Karen, did you want to react?
No, I think a crisis like this shows how vulnerable or unbalanced society is, because it shakes us and it pushes us. And it underlines that we need to invest in health, and that we need to regard health as not just having access to a doctor, but also that we have a society that is promoting health and that allows everybody to live healthy lives and have access to health services. And for me, having a healthy society and having a healthy form of government where you do not have great disparities in opportunity for everybody in society is crucial for a stable and society that is able to actually deal with crisis. And I mean, Denmark is not ideal, but we have shown during this crisis that we've been able to take a lot of very strict measures, locking down society very quickly, but doing it through democratic means. And we had the economic stability to actually be able to invest in the employees of companies that had to close down as a society and find common solutions. So I think, well, of course, I would say this as a social liberal, that this is the way forward, that we need to invest in equal opportunities for all in our society and not allow a large part of our society to be living on the fringes and not caring about their access to health.
Thank you very much, Karen. A few more questions from the audience, because we still have a few minutes, luckily. So Giorgio did specify what he meant with sample surveys. He actually meant labor force survey. I'm not sure that helps. He meant that's a solution
I think
has been lacking.
That is something that could assist what is going on at the moment, having more sort of voluntarily provided data, but we still need to make sure that this data is treated properly and protecting people's privacy when it's provided. But this is something that could assist, yes.
Diego, any thoughts?
No? Yeah, same, but as Karen well said, it should be done on a voluntary basis. It cannot be done in a way that if you don't use this voluntary measure, then you are discriminated. We saw on a different topic on facial recognition, we saw an example, I think it was in Poland, where some students, it was used in schools, and those who went through the facial recognition system would get quicker access to the canteen than those who refuse to do that. So, of course, we cannot build such systems that are in the end mandatory or discriminatory for those who don't want to use them.
Thank you. Now, more questions from the participants. In a situation where your freedom of movement is already restricted, do you not think that people are tempted to take on a model where they register location voluntarily?
Probably, but I mean, that's also why we need to make sure that we don't push for things that would tempt people to give away their fundamental rights as governments and authorities.
Thank you. Yes, there's a few questions that I can just probe you on. This one from Facebook, coming from Facebook. Do you believe that the European solidarity is at risk because of the COVID crisis? And another one is, although we discussed it before, I think it's nice to raise it again. How can we ensure that the common European standard is actually being proposed and is being put in place? One participant mentions that Finland is going its own way as another example of a member state taking its own decision making in that.
I think we need to find a good European solution regarding collection of data, also both so that we can share it, but also so that we can learn from each other. I think a lot of member states have gone their own way and thought that they would be stronger for that. But I truly believe that we are stronger when we're acting together and in solidarity. And we should do that not just because we want to do good to the other countries, but because it will actually also help our own efforts. So out of pure self-interest, we should be cooperating and not be fighting each other.
Well, I have one question from Georgia. It was just upvoted. So the main concern is the usage of information and data by governments that are not that trustworthy. Do you think that the creation of an EU-backed application supervised by the European Parliament might be used by countries beyond the European Union? This would create trust towards it, at least in some countries, and also tighten the ability of respective governments to use information improperly if they were to misuse it.
Yeah, if I may, well, if it's an app that has been produced by the public authorities with the subscription of the EDPS in this case, and also with the support, of course, of the European Data Protection Board and the local data protection authorities, that's fine to me. If it's free software, we can read the code and see how it works, it can be something that could lead the way for other countries around the world. It could be also the other way around, because there's some magnificent technology out there that we don't know about that we can import. So as long as it fits within this criteria, I'm happy to use any app that works. And regarding the situation of the EU, I think it's probably one of the worst crises that is going to put the EU in a very difficult test. It's worse than the 2008 crisis. It's worse than the Brexit. It's worse than even the so-called migration refugee crisis. So this is either we live out of this together and stronger as a community of member states. Otherwise, we're going to be seriously damaged.
Thank you, Karen.
I think this is a test for the European cooperation. The member states did not get very good grades in the beginning of the test. Hopefully they can improve as we go along. But Europe has also been built through crisis. And I hope that we will come up with the right answers that will make sure that the cooperation comes out stronger. Because I think that the mistakes that we've made in the beginning of this crisis has been when we did not use the cooperation between member states and having strong EU institutions helping the member states. That's when we failed. And I think we need to build better health capabilities in the European institutions so that we can help the member states better.
Thank you very much. Well, I see there are a few more questions being asked, and I want to thank all the participants that chipped in today, including via video. I think that was Baba. Thank you to all for your participations and your excellent questions. So we discussed a few things. We discussed how European countries can each balance effectiveness and privacy, and the extent to which location data can be efficient, and who is really in charge, who should be responsible of managing all that, and the level of awareness among people, how can we raise that further, and also what we're learning from all this. And I think a strong message that came from Karen in particular was that it's important to have a European coordinated approach, and we all are aware that these things can take time. And how are we going to get there is still the jury is still out as to how are we going to manage that, and can the EU survive this, including in light of the crisis, the economic crisis, but also one of the tests would be potentially the development of an EU-wide practice for data management and data sharing in times of emergency. So I want to thank you, Karen and Diego, for all your answers and bearing with all the participants' answers as well, questions as well. And thank you to the European Liberal Forum for having us today. I would like to take the opportunity to remind the participants here that there will be a next online event for this series called Liberties in Lockdown, and the next episode will tackle the effects of the coronavirus on the economy and the free movement of goods, services, and people, and it will be taking place on similar platform Zoom on Wednesday, 15th of April, at the same time at 9:30 Brussels time. So with that, thank you very much again, and I think the discussion is only starting, and I look forward to having more of those with you and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Yes, I think that was the best wrap-up that we could have had in the given situation. I just want to remind you of one thing that Karen said. We should especially look, when it comes to privacy, look for the highest common denominator and not the lowest one. And therefore, indeed, the European solution seems to be the only one. Indeed, so our data is not going viral as other things are doing at the moment. Thank you, Eileen, for this fantastic moderation. Thank you all for joining us today. Of course, Karen and Diego, but also everyone who has been here. We had over 50 participants and attendees. I think that's not too bad for our first attempt. And having said that, it is an experiment that we are doing here right now. Again, to echo Karen, we are forced to, in this situation here right now, we have to try new things. This is something new. And indeed, next week, at the same time, we are going to talk about the free movement of goods, services, and people both from a European, but also from a domestic perspective, because being under lockdown in your own country doesn't only make it difficult to bring wares and goods and services from one country to another, but also from one house to another. Having said that, thank you very much once more again. You can watch this once more again on Facebook if you're interested. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want. But also tell your friends about that, because sharing is caring. I hope to see you next week, and thank you very much for tuning in.